Everyone, please come in, take your seats so we can get started. We want to get the next panel going, a discussion about experiences from NATO enlargement in the past. We have a very distinguished Ambassador Fried who did everything on this issue imaginable. And we have a great friend who is a partner in this effort in Lithuania, Žygimantas Paviljonis, and we'll let Žygis take it from here.
Okay, so we were to start to talk about NATO lessons, lessons of NATO enlargement. So I have three to start. Well, first of all, dealing with Russia, you have to be very clear. If you do not draw the line, they will continue destroying your country. When the West draws the line, they are actually stopping it, and they are actually starting to respect you. You consolidate your sovereignty, so do anything what is possible to push EU and NATO enlargement to the territories that want to stay democratic. We understood it very clearly, and we launched those NATO and EU enlargement campaigns. So for this, another lesson, please invest into your diplomacy. You have the best, you have to have the best people, you have to have enough resources, you have to ask the best and wisest friends to help you, from think tanks to journalists, for them to explain why it is important for the West to have Georgia in, what's the benefit of it. But if you will not be able to generate that political will in the West, you will fail. And third lesson is internal and clear. In order to attract that will and create that momentum, you just have to be the best. You just have to be champion on everything. On starting from democracy, you have to be the best. It means you have to be united, left and right, have to be united on strategic stuff. Shouldn't imprison each other after each elections, should keep it together, should surprise by something that is unique. Well, Estonians are always surprising with some IT stuff, Lithuanians now try to surprise with some other stuff, fintech and others, but you have to be interesting, you have to contribute, you have to surprise. If you are just average, you die. It's just impossible to win that race. So those are three things from me. Draw the line to Russians, because they will always be crossing it. Generate the political will, and don't ever listen to the West, what they say to you. If they say it's not time, it's later, just push it hard, and you will actually win. And third thing, be perfect.
Simple, easy. Well done. Well, that's great, Žygis. Thank you. I'd like to make this a conversation among the three of us, not so much moderated, but I'd like to say some things. I know Dan would as well. I want to bring the audience in as well. But Dan, when you look at the time period here of 1989 to 2019, we're not talking about 97 Madrid summit or 2002, but really starting at 89. What do you think the lessons are, and what do you think the important messages are for people to understand?
Okay, in 1989, exactly 30 years ago, Solidarity was getting ready to take the government in Poland. And this was regarded with something like trepidation leading to terror. And the jokes going around Warsaw at the time all ended up with everybody in a concentration camp. I mention this because we now look back at the transformation after '89 and the first enlargements of NATO as easy and inevitable. And I promise you it wasn't. In 1989, if someone had mentioned NATO enlargement as the strategic answer to the fall of the Berlin Wall, they would have been laughed out of the room, because 30 years ago, the Berlin Wall was standing. NATO enlargement to Poland was regarded as irresponsible. NATO enlargement to the Baltics was regarded as something silly. It was a hard struggle. Now, the bad news for Georgia is that we're back in a period where NATO membership for Georgia is seen as difficult, if not impossible, and the language of the Bucharest NATO summit is repeated but not really meant. The good news is Georgia has tools now that Poland could not even dream of in 1989. The military-to-military relationship between the US and Georgia, between NATO and Georgia, has basically the training, cooperation elements that Georgia needs to be ready for the alliance. And it doesn't require any more political decisions. It's there, and it's a matter of reaching out and getting it. So the current political constellation is lined up in a way to make discussion of NATO membership for Georgia difficult. But if we've learned anything from the past 30 years, it's that the current political constellation is not going to remain static. Something will change. And when Russian officials, and I'm borrowing from the last panel, when Russian officials start talking publicly about postoyanny zastoy, all right, to describe the current situation in Russia, I mean, my God, that means we are in the decrepit phase of Putinism, and that's not according to me, that's according to them. So why would anybody straight line current developments into the future? Which means that the three pieces of advice are good pieces of advice. And Georgia should stick to them and remember that what seems impossible now may turn out to be inevitable, and Georgia needs to be ready for that window to open, and it will open under circumstances that we can probably not want, we probably wouldn't want to write down because it would be considered silly or frivolous or outlandish. Just as outlandish as 30 years ago when Polish membership in NATO was regarded as a cabaret joke by, the Polish comedian Jacek Fedorovich. And it went from joke to reality within a few years. So I point that out for the Georgians. Hold firm. Listen to your Baltic friends. They've been there, pounding the Americans, successfully as it turned out. And then do the work at home. The last thought. In the beginning, in the early days, the Poles wanted to be in NATO, but the way they got in was to work on the reforms at home, which generated the political capital that they could invest in their strategic objectives. And my point is obvious. Georgia can generate, it needs to and can generate the political capital for itself, strengthening its democratic institutions, not doing stupid stuff, and you can fill in the blank, all the Georgians here, and everybody here knows what I mean by that. Don't do stupid stuff, work on the reforms, grow the economy, generate the political capital for yourself, and then at the right moment you will invest it and succeed.
And thank you, Dan. I'll add a couple thoughts to this too. And part of that is it's not just because NATO and the EU say so. It's like when the doctor tells you to, exercise a little bit, eat better, don't drink so much, and get enough sleep. It's not just because the doctor says so. It's because it's actually going to make you healthier. And I think that is what Dan is saying about the reforms and the things needed as a country. It will help you present yourself better to NATO and the EU, but you'll just be a healthier country to begin with. Now, what I want to say is I think the most important thing these days when we talk about fake news and propaganda and Russian influence and all that is to remind people of what the truthful story of NATO enlargement actually is. Because everybody hears the Russian narrative and starts to believe it when it's exactly the opposite of what happened. So the first thing, as Dan pointed out, NATO was not looking around in 1989 or 1991 shopping for countries with which to encircle Russia. Quite the opposite. NATO was telling countries, no, 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 you're not ready, not now. Let's do partnership for peace instead. You know, let's do search and rescue at sea. You know, let's not talk about NATO enlargement. All of that. And it was the persistence of the countries themselves and the people themselves saying, no, we have suffered for 40 years under Soviet occupation, and while yes, we want to be a democracy, and yes, we want to be prosperous, we also want to know that that's not going to be taken away from us again. So we want to be part of a secure community. So it was a demand-driven process by people, not an aggressive process by NATO members. That's critically important to understand. The next thing is that as NATO has gone from the first enlargement to the second and third and so forth, it has remained that process, that people in countries that were left behind have said, we want our future to be safe also. Why should people in Sofia or in Tallinn or in Vilnius not be as safe as people in Warsaw or Prague? So it was a demand-driven process again. The third thing is that this is not aggression toward Russia. In fact, this doesn't touch Russia. It is not threatening to Russia in any way. NATO is a defensive alliance, can't agree on anything until somebody's attacked. So it is not going to be threatening Russia in any way at all. It is a defensive alliance about protecting people from any outside threats. It is also not true that NATO was doing this as some form of psychological pressure on Russia. Quite the opposite again. NATO made every effort in the 1990s, in the 1997 NATO-Russia Founding Act, in 2002 with the establishment of the NATO-Russia Council, in series of dialogues about peacekeeping, about missile defense, about security doctrine, trying to work together with Russia and trying to identify areas where NATO and Russia could be good partners. Russia decided that it did not any longer want that partnership right around 2007. And we saw that in President Putin's speech at Munich. That was the rupture in NATO and Russia caused by Russia, not by the alliance and not by any designs of the alliance. It's still true today that NATO would like to be able to work together with Russia, but Russia has done things that now make this relatively hard to imagine, if not impossible, through its behavior, through its aggression, through its activities elsewhere, and on and on. So that is the actual story of what's happened with NATO enlargement. And taking the case of Georgia, if Georgia were to become a member of NATO, this is not a threat to Russia. No one is thinking anywhere in Georgia or elsewhere of attacking Russia. That would be crazy. When Russia was talking about how threatening it is for the Baltic states to want to join NATO, Russia doesn't seriously believe the Baltic states are going to attack Russia. We all know that. So I think we need to be clear about what the purposes of NATO are and what the results of NATO enlargement are. They are stabilizing, they are democracy producing, they are economy producing, and they produce stable neighbors for Russia. The best neighbors that Russia has are the oldest members of NATO.
To foot stomp Kurt's point, thanks to NATO enlargement, Europe to Russia's west is the most secure and peaceful in Russia's history. Russia was threatened by megalomaniac strongmen like Napoleon or Hitler. But thanks to NATO, there is no threat to Russia. And so I can say with a clear conscience to the Russians, you're welcome, without expectation of a positive response.
And one more way you're welcome is that if you also become a democracy and take care of your people and play by rules of law and get out of your neighbor's territory, you can be a partner with, if not a member of NATO someday as well. This is an open community. It's all about people. It's all about people having their lives, their freedom, their security, their prosperity guaranteed. And we want to see that for Russian people as well.
If I can just jump up with another kind of Lithuanian wisdom, we are always using on every day in our diplomatic kind of relations with Russia. Maybe it could sound too radical, but we never treat anything Russian officials say as truth. Actually, if they say something positive, we immediately suspect that something is really wrong with our own policies. If they say that something is really wrong, we actually applaud and say, this is a victory. Well, to make it maybe not so funny, you all remember Bucharest NATO summit. They were saying that NATO enlargement will actually provoke Russia to act. We knew that this is complete, lie. And I really hope that the West really understands this lesson. At least when I go to the Chancellor of Merkel, I always remind those people, you've been fooled by Putin, because this is your inaction, your inability to act that provoked Russia's occupation. So do everything opposite to what they say. Have your own agenda, because if not, you are building your policies on actually, Soviet or Russian lies. What McCain was always saying, this is gasoline station run by mafia. So of course mafia lies, because that's nothing surprising. The Soviet Union was built on lies. We all know that in our families we had to pretend that this Orwellian, kind of world is real, but it was not real. It was always built on lies, and they just continue doing it. So instead of, buying into lies on G8 or, I don't know, Council of Europe or other wonderful stuff Russians do, have your own truth. Have your own strategy, have your own vision. Be so clear with Europe whole and free and EU and NATO enlargement as you've been clear, with us, the Baltics. Because now you leave Georgians in limbo. You say, actually, you stay gray zone, you behave and you wait for the moment. It will not happen like this. The gray zone will be filled with Russian dark colors, and they will actually color it white. And it's not truth. If we are fighting for truth, we have to have our own vision and strategy and make it clear to Georgians. You will be NATO member if you perform, if you do 5 stuff, 5 or 10 clear steps, because now we are not saying it to them. We just say, be the best, but actually we are leaving you in gray zone for another grab from Moscow.
So we have just a few minutes. We're keeping this a short discussion, but I want to invite a couple comments from the audience. And here comes a microphone. So Thomas Kleiner-Brockhoff from Germany.
Hi, Thomas Kleiner-Brockhoff, GMF, Germany. So let me, we've all learned we should learn from history, and you've just made the point on this panel. You need to push hard, you need to work hard. It seems impossible, the door opens, all of a sudden you're there, and that's the analogy from history that this panel has just suggested. So my question to all of you is, how does that account for the fact that NATO enlargement in the first several rounds was based on an American hegemony that isn't anymore? How does that account for a debate that now has covered 2 presidencies about American overextension? How does it account for the fact that Russia has made abundantly clear, including with military force, that it won't have any of it? And how does it account for a US president that at every corner voices doubts about defending Montenegro and, by the way, defending Germany? I would just like to see the clarity of the argument accounting for some historical changes since then.
I tried to give myself some cover earlier by saying that the time was not right now. But to answer as many of your questions, and very briefly, the original NATO enlargement was not based on American hegemony. I would dispute that. In fact, the original NATO enlargement was based on an understanding between the US and Germany that this was the right thing to do. It was actually more collective than you think. The Russians are certainly, both opposed to NATO enlargement, but they have used military force against Georgia and Ukraine, possibly for the purposes of stopping it. That's the present reality. It may not be the reality of for all time. As far as President Trump goes, happily there is a panel devoted to the U.S., and I look forward to it for that reason. But I don't want to make light, because you've touched on something which is important, which is American public opinion going through now one of its periodic phases of world weariness, particularly strong right now, it's sometimes called isolationism, but it really is better kind of unilateralist nationalism. And it is an American tradition. It's just one that's been in remission for several generations, and one of which I'm not particularly proud. But it's there. I think we will get through it. How we get through it and the arguments used is happily not my responsibility right now, but I'll just say that will take a lot of work. While we in the United States and in Europe are working through our respective problems and commitments to the West and the advance of freedom, I think our message should be our original vision is still valid. We should urge the Georgians and Ukrainians and others to hold fast, and we should work on and recognize the problems that brought us these current complications. I mean, there's more to say, but that's enough for now.
And could I just add on the second of Thomas's 4 questions was an America that is feeling overextended. And I would just point out that NATO is much stronger today because of enlargement than it was before. We now have 100 million people who are committed to protecting freedom and democracy and borders in Europe than we had before NATO enlarged.
And just maybe also emotional reaction, but when I was ambassador in Washington, D.C., I was doing democracy, and sometimes I was telling my friends, I feel more American than you guys, because when I have to, spend 80% of my time to lobby in Washington for democracy, it makes kind of strange, because that's your constitution. That's what I learned from my books, still in Soviet Union, when we were revolting, against some autocracy. So when you say American overextension, I then remember the last words of Robert Palmer, who wrote the Westminster speech. He was in my embassy. We had last reception, and his last toast before, dying months after was Žygis, fight for freedom and democracy, because I don't understand why Americans are limiting those values only for some territories in the world. Those are basic human dignity values that, every human shares. I was in Taiwan just recently. They look like us. Why don't we have the strength to fight for our own values? Why we, the post-war generation, like, generation of Adenauer or, your post-war generation, why we have to remind you from Lithuania and Georgia to be American or German like the Konrad Adenauer generation was? Those are your values you have to fight for. Why do you allow autocracies to dominate the world and kill democracy for the last 12 years after Bucharest summit? We are more German American and Americans today, Lithuanians and Georgians, than you then.
Okay, thank you. I think we have time for 2 more questions. Did you want to ask a question?
მოგესალმებით ჩვენო მეგობრებო, დამსწრე საზოგადოება. მე გახლავართ ირმა ინაშვილი, საქართველოს პარლამენტის თავმჯდომარის მოადგილე, საქართველოს პარლამენტის წევრი. ჩვენ არავითარი კანონი არ დაგვირღვევია და არც დესტრუქცია და პროვოკაცია მოგვიწყვია. ნინო აი
მოგესალმებით, მე ვარ პარლამენტის წევრი, ვიცე-სპიკერი ირმა ინაშვილი. That's in reverse. Okay. Too much stress for me. Sorry. So So the Vice Speaker, the Member of Parliament of Georgia, just introduced herself, and this is Irma Inashvili, the leader of the Alliance of Patriots.
მე მგონი ყველა განერვიულდა და მე დარბაზ ვთხოვ შვიდად ვიყოთ, იმიტომ რომ არაფერი პროვოკაცია არ ყოფილა და არც მოხდება. ჩვენ ვართ ცივილიზებული ადამიანები და ყოველთვის მომხრე ვართ სიმშვიდის, წესრიგის და არა დესტრუქციის.
So I think there are too much tensions in the room, and I want to call the audience to be calm because we are civilized people and we have never meant to do any sort of provocations, and we are here just for the statement.
ძალიან საინტერესო კონფერენციაა, რომელიც მიმდინარეობს საქართველოში და საინტერესო გამომსვლელები არიან, ყველას მივესალმები.
It's a very interesting conference that is taking place and very interesting speakers, and I want to welcome all the speakers and greet them.
სამწუხაროა, რომ ჩვენი საპარლამენტო პარტია პატრიოტთა ალიანსი არ იყო მოწვეული ამ კონფერენციაზე, თორემ მივიღებდით მონაწილეობას
It is
აუცილებლად.
regretful that our party was not invited to the conference, so we would very much love to take part in the proceedings of the panels.
როცა მე ვიყავი ჟურნალისტი, დაახლოებით 18-19 წლის და ვაშუქებდით შეერთებულ შტატებში საქართველოს მაშინდელი პრეზიდენტის ვიზიტებს,
When I was a journalist back in the day, and we were reporting about Georgia's president's visits to the United States,
მაშინ ჩვენ ამერიკელი პოლიტიკოსები გვეუბნებოდნენ, რომ იცით რა არის მთავარი მონაპოვარი, პოლიტიკური პლურალიზმი, ეს არის დემოკრატია.
So now back then, American politicians were telling us that the main gain is the political pluralism, and that was the main lesson for us back then.
პოლიტიკური პლურალიზმი ნიშნავს იმას, რომ როდესაც ჩემზე, როგორც პარტიაზე, ლაპარაკობენ კონფერენციის მონაწილეები და გუშინ ჩვენზე იყო დიდხანს საუბარი, მეც უნდა მქონდეს გამოსვლის საშუალება.
So in my understanding, political pluralism means that when there is a discussion about my political party, I should be given a chance to be there in the room and be part of the discussions and to respond to some of the allegations.
რამდენიმე ცოტა არ იყოს ცინიკური შეფასება მოვისმინე მე სხვადასხვა დარბაზში მსხდომი წარმომადგენლებისგან.
There has
მომხსენებლებს არ ეხება.
been a couple of cynical statements, mainly from the audience. It does not concern the speakers at the podium.
და მინდა გამოვეხმაურო ასევე გუშინ ბატონ ბოკერიას გამოსვლას, რომელმაც ძირითადად ჩვენზე ილაპარაკა.
And I want to reply to Mr. Bokheria, who dedicated his speech yesterday from this podium mainly to our
But
party.
please, if you can come to your question.
კითხვაზე გადავდივარ ახლა.
Yeah, so now
კითხვამდე
question
ხომ
is coming.
მივიდეთ. ჩვენ ვართ ჩვენი ქვეყნის პატრიოტები, საქართველოს პატრიოტები პირველ რიგში.
So we are the patriots of our country and the patriots of Georgia.
ჩვენ ვაფასებთ დასავლეთის დახმარებას და ურთიერთობას ჩვენ საერთაშორისო პარტნიორებთან.
So we highly value the support that we are receiving from the West and from our partners.
მაგრამ
But
ის რაც გუშინ ჩვენზე ითქვა და ბევრი ციტატა დამახინჯებულად იყო აქ წარმოდგენილი ბატონი ბოკერიას მხრიდან, ეს არის ტყუილი და ცილისწამება.
But much of what has been said about our party yesterday, mainly by Mr. Bokheria, is a lie.
ისინი ცდილობენ ბოკერია სააკაშვილები თქვენზე შეინარჩუნონ მონოპოლია და თქვენ მუდმივად გიმტკიცებდნენ, რომ აი ჩვენ ვართ პროდასავლურები.
So Bokheria and Saakashvili, they're trying to keep monopoly on the pro-Western sentiments of this country.
ხოლო ესენი ქვეყნის წრები და აგენტები არიან.
ესენი ვინ არიან?
ჩვენ ანუ ქართველი ხალხი.
And we are the enemies of the country according to their narrative.
დასავლურობა მათ როგორ ესმით, იცით? როგორც ადამიანთა წამება, რასაც აკეთებდნენ,
So being pro-Western in their understanding is the torture of people, what they have been doing in the past.
მიტინგების დარბევა,
The crackdown of the demonstrations,
ბიზნესმენებისთვის ქონების წართმევა, რასაც აკეთებდა სააკაშვილი და ბოკერია,
pressure on businesses and taking away the property,
არჩევნების გაყალბება,
rigging the elections,
ქვეყნის ტერიტორიების 22%-ის ჩაბარება მოწინააღმდეგისთვის.
giving away 22% of the Georgian territories to the enemy.
ადამიანთა წამება, მკვლელობა, აქციების დარბევა,
ეკო იყო უკვე.
ეს დასავლური ღირებულებებია? აი ჩემი შეკითხვა ეს არის პირველი.
So my question is, all of the above mentioned can be considered as the pro-Western values?
მე ზუსტად ვიცი რომ ეს არ არის დასავლური ღირებულებები.
I know that they're not.
ეს არის ბოლშევიზმი და ფაშიზმი.
I know that it's a Bolshevism and fascism.
ჩვენ ვართ, ჩვენ საქართველოს პატრიოტები, ნამდვილად ქართული პარტია და დასავლური აზროვნების პარტია.
So we are the real Georgian, pro-Georgian party with the Georgian values.
ამიტომ იცოდეთ, როცა ბოკერიები და სააკაშვილები და მათი ექსპერტები ჩვენზე საუბრობენ, ყველაფერი ტყუილია.
So please be aware that when Bokeria, Saakashvili and their allies are talking to you about us, all of the what they have to say is a
ანუ
lie.
ჩემი პირველი შეკითხვა არის თუ არა დასავლური ღირებულებები და დასავლური აზროვნება ადამიანების წამება და მე გაგახსენებთ სულხან მოლაშვილის წამების ფაქტს თუ არ იცით მოგიყვებიან შემდეგ ეს არის თუ არა და მეორე ძალიან საინტერესო თეზისები ითქვა გუშინაკ და ხაზგასმული იყო რომ აუცილებელია პირდაპირი დიალოგი რუსეთთან მაგრამ ეს გადაწყვეტილება უნდა მიიღოს საქართველოს მთავრობა.
So first question is the torture of the people and the specific case of Sulkhan Mulashvili was brought up. If this can be considered as the pro-Western value. And the second question was Bodish Rusetze როგორ თქვით თუ შეიძლება თავიდან.
პირდაპირი დიალოგი რუსეთთან აუცილებელია ბატონიტეტის
ეს კითხვაა მათ, ანუ. And the second point is if the direct dialogue with Russia is indeed necessary at this point.
Great. Thank you very much.
არ დამიმთავრებია ვამთავრებ ორ წამში.
No, please,
One more
please.
point.
We have many people here.
არა ვასრულებ მეორე შეკითხვას. ბატონო კრამერ, თქვენ მე ბოდიში უნდა მომიხადოთ. თქვენ მე ბოდიში უნდა მომიხადოთ.
One more
ბოდიში
question and
უნდა
we're
მომიხადოთ.
wrapping up.
იმიტომ რომ თქვენ გადააბიჯეთ და შეურაცხყოფა მიაყენეთ საქართველოს კონსტიტუციას და საქართველოს პარლამენტის წევრს. ბოდიში მომიხადეთ. და მეორე შეკითხვა. საუბარია საქართველოს ტერიტორიული მთლიანობის აღდგენის სხვადასხვა კონცეფციაზე.
So there are a lot of talks about several concepts of restoring Georgia's territorial integrity.
რა კონცეფციას გვთავაზობთ თქვენ, რომ ეს იყოს დანაკარგების გარეშე, ამან არ გამოიწვიოს ახალი ტერიტორიების დაკარგვა ჩვენთვის და ეს მოხდეს მშვიდობიანად. კონკრეტულად რა კონცეფციას
So
გვთავაზობთ
what
თქვენ,
is your
მადლობ.
specific concept about Georgia joining NATO without losing any territories and without any losses to the sovereignty and territorial integrity? That's all. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Shota, can you summarize that question so I understand what it is?
The last one. Yeah. Well.
Yeah. Just summarize it, if you would.
Yeah. The question was that what is your concept, and if there is any, just to explain to Ms. Inashvili, how do you propose to get Georgia into NATO without losing territories and without serious damage to Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity?
So thank you very much, and thank you. And it's important, I believe, that everyone have an opportunity to express a view, everyone have the opportunity to ask a question. I think it's important to be respectful to everybody. We have a lot of people, so lots of people want to speak. To the question about Georgia recovering its territory and Georgia also potentially becoming a member of NATO, I don't think these are incompatible ideas. I think that, first off, everyone that is here strongly supports Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity And we would like nothing more than to see the peaceful reintegration of the territories that Russia now occupies. NATO membership is a defensive alliance. NATO membership is about countries being willing to fight to defend countries if they are attacked. Immediately, a question would arise if Georgia becomes a member while these territories are occupied by Russia. And what we heard from Secretary General Rasmussen this morning was an important idea, which is that Georgia has already determined that it is not going to retake these territories by force. It wants to see them peacefully reintegrated. I think if NATO could adopt the same idea, we support Georgia's sovereignty and territorial integrity, but would exclude application of Article 5 to those territories for an indefinite period to prevent conflict and allow time for the peaceful reintegration of those territories. I think that would be in the best interest of the people themselves. Dan, did you want to comment? Or Zigis?
Another question came up about Georgian history, Mr. Saakashvili and Mr. Bokharia. And the question was, as I recall, did they, in the course of their rule, do things which were questionable and perhaps inconsistent with democratic values? Perhaps so. And they were voted out of office peacefully, and they have not been in office for some years, which is a sign of the strength of Georgian democracy, and in the end, I suppose, to their credit, that they were, having been voted out of office, willing to surrender that power. That's a good thing. It's not for me or for any American to judge Georgian politics, but I am heartened by the fact that governments could be replaced through a democratic election. And I cannot say the same for Russia.
I would maybe sadly repeat what I repeat in each conference that I come. I don't know actually your name, madam, but I think Bokharia is your best friend. And you will have to love him, because that's exactly what we learned in Lithuania. You can be very different. You can have very different opinions. But if you want to really convince those gentlemen on your strategic national goals, you have to stay with Bokharia until you enter EU and NATO. Then you can fight and do whatever you want. But you don't do what you just did before entering NATO.
And final question, woman in the gray sweater in the middle here. Do we have a microphone for her? Final question. One more question. She's been waiting. No. Just be brief.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting panel. I'm just going to ask a very quick question. Like, what would you say to the people who are worried that our integration to NATO, or like our own strategy, as you mentioned, our own strategy, different from what Russia wants us to have? What would you say to people who are worried that this will provoke Russia? Because there are still people in Georgia who think they're like, okay, maybe we should think about NATO because it might anger Russia. And people believe, like some people, usually older generation, believe that the Georgia-Russia war was kind of one of the reasons of this war was that, like, because we had our own strategy, because we were trying to be less different from Russia, that kind of provoked Russia-Georgian war. So what would you say, what would you tell people who are worried, some of them in our government, like what would you tell them?
So I'll say briefly, but Ziggy should really answer this. Russia attacked Georgia when Georgia was not a member of NATO. And so the thought that by becoming a member of NATO you're provoking Russia is upside down, because Russia did it before, knowing that Georgia was not. Russia has not actually attacked any NATO member ever.
Yeah, and if that means provocation, so provoke Russia. provoke Russia because you're fighting not only for the freedom of your country, but for Russian freedom itself. You're provoking KGB in Russia, and this is very good.
And that is all the time we have. So thank you all very, very much. We'll move on to the next thing.